In its 7th year, the Louisiana Book Festival in downtown Baton Rouge presents a bounty of authors and their works. Join us for Louisiana Book Talks as we celebrate our rich literary heritage and visit with exceptional authors at the 2009 Louisiana Book Festival. Lifelong learning through reading is the mission of the Louisiana Book Festival, and thousands of book lovers of all ages are eager to participate. Between the state capitol and the state library, the festival is packed with booths featuring everything from children's storytellers to authors signing their latest works. Inside the state capitol, more than a dozen venues present authors throughout the day, discussing their books and providing a look into the writer's life. Our discussion today is entitled, Why I Laugh at the P.O., The Humor of Eudora Welty. The panel is moderated by Brannon Costello, an associate professor of English at Louisiana State University, who is the author of numerous scholarly articles. He's joined by John Lowe, a professor of English and comparative literature and director of the program in Louisiana and Caribbean Studies at Louisiana State University, who has authored several books, including the forthcoming Faulkner's Fraternal Fury. The third panelist is James Wilcox, the author of 9 novels, including Modern Baptists and Hunk City.
When I teach Eudora Welty in my Southern literature classes, she's cheek by jowl on the syllabus with Flannery O'Connor. I'm sure a lot of you have read both of them. I often remark in class that Welty opened her window, looked out at the world, and was filled with wonder. O'Connor opened her window, looked out, and was filled with horror. Very often in life, when we're filled with wonder, we laugh, and Welty and her characters seem like the lovable character Ed Wynn plays in the film. You remember Mary Poppins, when they're laughing and going up into the ceiling? And he sings, I love to laugh, loud and strong and clear. I love to laugh, it's getting worse every year. And that was true for Eudora Welty, too. As everybody knows who knew her, I went to the Welty Centennial this year, and there were great stories about her and her witty sayings and her hijinks and so forth. She started using this gift for humor at the age of 11 when she wrote a funny book to amuse her brother who was ill. It was called The Glorious Apology, and it has a wonderful sense of fun, a satiric outlook, and an emerging sense of parody when she's 11. Welty thought in images, and she eventually became a gifted and published photographer. Her love for the camera was coupled with a sense of fun, and she delighted in creating comic poses with her friends. And I brought a photo in, the computer's on the fritz, but it shows her lying across a railroad track, draped like a femme fatale. And on the one hand, the beauty on the railroad tracks was a staple of silent films, and she's satirizing that. But she's also the steamy dame reclining luxuriously and at ease in the manner of an odalisque with a mischievous grin on her face. And she had other pictures dressed up like Groucho Marx with her glasses and all kinds of crazy things. Nancy Walker has suggested that women writers have a sense of humor quite like that of ethnic Americans, since they too have been relegated to the margins of public expression. And it used to be said women are bad at telling jokes, unless like Joan Rivers and Phyllis Diller, they make fun of themselves and other women. And Southern women in particular were forbidden to tell risque stories in public, although we know God's plenty of this went on behind closed doors when women were apart from the men. But even so, their wisecracks were often like that of the men folks, and subject matter overlaps too. And Roy Blount Jr. declares, you can say that Southern humor deals with typical concerns of the region. Dirt, chickens, defeat, family, religion, prejudice, collard greens, politics, and diddy-wah-diddy. But are not these concerns boiled down pretty much like everybody else's? Of course, Southerners boil them down, speaking figuratively, except with regard to collard greens and diddy-wah-diddy, with ham hock in the pot. While much of this ham in Welty indeed comes from the pantry of Southern humor, she was aware, to extend Walker's point further, of ethnic humor from the great comedians she heard on the radio and then at the movies, such as Jack Benny, Ed Wynn, Fibber McGee and Molly, Burns and Allen, Charlie Chaplin, Ben Blue, and the Keystone Cops. And when she started writing For her college literary magazine, she modeled her pieces after the ones she'd read in Judge magazines, such as S.J. Perelman and Corey Ford. I'm going to turn now to her most famous short story, Why I Live at the P.O. And how many of you have read it? I imagine most of you. Okay, good. I don't have to tell the plot. Great. It's received some great analysis over the years, but it really deserves a second look today as we celebrate her centennial, because it's truly one of our nation's comic masterpieces. And to shift from Blount's collards and ham hock, Sister's narrative is an oral equivalent of the dish she cooks during the story. Green tomato pickle, a metaphor for envy and jealousy. But a pickle is also a jam, an impasse that has to be negotiated, and a sticky one at that. Like Iago, everything she says is designed to instill doubt in her sister, Stella Rondo. She states her case concisely at the start. I was getting along fine with Mama, Papa, Daddy, Uncle Rondo, till my sister Stella Rondo just separated from her husband and came back home again. Mr. Whitaker. Of course, I went with Mr. Whitaker first when he first appeared here in China Grove, taking pose yourself photos, and Stella Rondo broke us up. Told him I was one-sided, bigger one side than the other, which is a deliberate, calculated falsehood. I'm the same. Stella Rondo is exactly 12 months to the day younger than I am, and for that reason, she's spoiled. This unforgettable opening quickly hooks all readers with his exotic southern names, the low comedy of pose yourself photos, and the hilarious use of the grotesque image of one-sidedness, which I always thought meant her breasts were different size, but Welty won't say that. On the mythic level, it establishes the delicious teaser of family hijinks yet to be disclosed, but also sets up the myth of the prodigal daughter and the universal but little studied syndrome of sibling rivalry. In the original story of the prodigal son, the Bible states, when he was a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran, fell on his neck, and kissed him. Also in the Bible, the son is ashamed. I will go to my father, say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven. Before thee am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. The compassion of the father is not present in Sister, but neither is the repentance of the prodigal apparent in Stella Rondo. The biblical parable ends after the complaint of the older brother. Angry at the prodigal's reception, he refuses to go in, prompting the father's assurance and rebuke, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. It was meet we should make merry. Be glad, this brother was dead, is alive again, was lost, and is found. From the very first page, however, Sister wants Stella Rondo, shamed, to be revealed as the real hussy. Mama tells Stella Rondo, here you had this marvelous blonde child, never so much as wrote your mother a word about it. I'm thoroughly ashamed of you, causing Sister to tell us, but of course she wasn't. And the child, Stella Rondo says, is adopted because she's too big to really be hers if it's a legitimate child. And we figure that out. But fictions such as these used to be quite common in Southern families. When my grandmother died, I told my daddy that he should call my uncle, my grandmother's brother, and he shocked me by saying, he's not your uncle, he's your cousin. And it seems my grandmother's sister had gotten pregnant by a married man, so she and her mother went on a year's vacation and came back with a baby. It was said to be my great-grandmother's, who raised the baby as her son. Sister's refusal to go along with the Stella Rondo's fiction is here treated comically, which is why her after hearing Shirley T is adopted causes consternation for Mama. Ironically, Mama, who has been the most invested in the fiction, provides us pretty substantial proof that Shirley T was conceived out of wedlock by saying, this child is far too big to be hers. Brevity, of course, is the soul of wit, and this has counterparts here. When told that Sister wants him to cut off his beard by Stella Rondo, Papa Daddy has a quick, emphatic, and short reply. Hussy. Battling this pronouncement, Sister tries to make Stella Rondo look like a tramp. Her initial judgment, she's spoiled, has a sexual meaning, as does her lounging in bed in her flesh-colored kimono, not pink, flesh-colored. Her depraved wastefulness, throwing things away, and above all her deception, stealing her sister's bow. Remember, Scarlett O'Hara did that too. Damns her, and we even learn Mr. Whitaker took pictures of her in kimonos, perhaps throwing a hint of pornography into the portrait. But despite this evidence, Sister's the one Papa Daddy brands a hussy. Similarly, when Sister has a gleam of hope, maybe Shirley T. is mute. She hasn't said anything. This would spoil the trump card of the new generation, so she confides her fear to Mama. And Welty sets the stage for this masterfully. Well, Mama and I just stood there and stared at each other. It was horrible. I remember well that Joe Whitaker frequently drank like a fish, says Mama. I believe to my soul he drank chemicals. Without another word, she marches to the foot of the stairs and calls Stella Rondo. Stella Rondo! Ooh, Stella Rondo! What, says Stella Rondo from upstairs? Not even the grace to get up off the bed. Can that child of yours talk? Asks Mama. Stella Rondo says, can she what? Talk, says Mama. Birdie, 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 birdie. Well, Shirley T. can talk. She bellows, I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. And her mother claims she can tap dance too, like Hollywood's famous Shirley Temple, who in fact sang You Gotta Eat Your Spinach in the 1936 film Poor Little Rich Girl, which has a refrain of, ooh, just like Mama. Sister is fond of over-the-top, exaggerated rhetoric, and Welty gets into the spirit of it, too, employing double typology. Yeah, the prodigal son legend's here, but we don't have to go too far to find another one. Remember the parable of Mary and Martha. In the gospel, Martha was cumbered about, much serving, came to him, said, Lord, dost thou not care? My sister hath left me to serve alone. Bid her, therefore, she help me. And Jesus answered and said unto her, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things, but one thing is needful, and Mary hath chosen that good part which shall not be taken away from her. Sister, yes, is troubled and resentful. There I was over the hot stove trying to stretch 2 chickens over 5 people and a completely unexpected child into the bargain without one moment's notice. Later she tells us Stella Rondo not only eats this chicken, but breast of chicken, the fatted calf. Also, getting the breast takes us back to the 2 sisters' struggle for their mother's love. The image of the bird's nest is appropriated by Sister for her tiny post office where she's telling us the story after she left the family. But this space is really a drastic reduction of her possibilities. The larger nest of the family home, properly constructed, should nourish both its fledglings and teach them how to fly. Sister, in fact, has become, though, what she feels Stella Rondo is, a bird that pushes the other ones out of the nest. In his book on birth orders, Frank Sulloway illustrates the Darwinian impulses of sibling rivalry by using the example of the cuckoo chick, also called the cowbird. Its mother deposits in the nest of another bird who has laid eggs. The cuckoo hatches first and has a special notch in its back which it employs to lift the other eggs up and out of the nest, thereby reigning supreme. Sister feels Stella Rondo has attempted to oust her 3 times. Once, being born. Secondly, returning home. And third, with Shirley T., who is the only grandchild, naturally reigns first with Mama. Since Sister's failed in her own effort to remove these implanted chicks, she settles for what is really a deserted nest, where she's dependent on her own resources. Unfortunately, the post office is unlikely to lead to a flight elsewhere, and Sister bemoans the fact that Stella Rondo stole the one man who came into China Grove from the outside, thereby offering a ticket out to the wider world. Consider the comic force of the names here. Sister, no other names given for her, although the eldest, is doomed to be a reflection of her siblings. She didn't become a sister till Stella Rondo was born, right? Further, the constant joking about Sister being an old maid, they play old maid too, just to taunt her. Sister stands for none. And then Mr. Whitaker, whose name is usually followed with an exclamation point, if you stress the I and A in the word, becomes, why take her? While Sister struggles to maintain her position with all the family, the real prize is Mama, and accordingly, that's the only name we have for that figure who has to balance her allegiances to both the daughters. Uncle Rondo, crazed with drugs from his pharmacy, goes round in circles in Stella Rondo's flesh-colored kimono, was obviously supposed to favor Stella Rondo when she was named after him. Also remember when Papa Daddy, who's as rich as God, and Uncle Rondo pass, who's going to get the money? I mean, this is another source of comedy in Southern fiction. As it demonstrates, although the firstborn child may adore her siblings, she also loathes it as an imposed replacement who threatens her uniqueness. But of course, some firstborns recover quicker. Welty, a firstborn herself, says, "I can't think I had much of a sense of humor as long as I remained the only child. When Edward came along, after I was 3, we became comics, making each other laugh. We set each other off." Still, she surely went through the childhood trauma I described above when the brothers were born. And further, though parents don't realize that their siblings who aren't parents are always placed at a disadvantage as they haven't given Mom and Pop the pleasure of grandchildren. And Welty, when she wrote the story, was certainly aware her brothers would be the source of the grandchildren. She wouldn't be. I don't like to give another writer the last word, but we're celebrating Miss Welty's birthday, so I yield to her. She told an interviewer once that humor was a form of entry. It's a way to try, risk something, a way to get around something, to make it endurable, to live with it or to shrug it off. And then it's inherent in a whole lot of living. It's there. People show an awful lot of things through humor, both conscious and unconscious. And Sister, in her post office, offers bodacious proof. Thank you.
Humor is so much reliant on timing and on precision. It seems off the cuff, but everything has to be crafted so beautifully. And rereading that piece just struck me so much about her tremendous craftsmanship as well. The first time that I really was beginning to take Welty seriously was when I was taking a workshop up at Yale with Robert Penn Warren. And one way he ran the workshop, rather than talking among the 12 of us about our particular stories, we do that in conferences, but he would pick a story to read every week and to talk about the author. And much of the time, he knew the author. So it was just thrilling to me if he'd talk about, read a Hemingway story, and he'd talk about meeting Hemingway and give his reactions as well. And Catherine Ann Porter, Old Mortality, was a story he would read as well. And, of course, he knew Porter quite well from actually Baton Rouge and New Orleans when he himself was down here teaching in Allen Hall on the campus, something I wasn't aware of at that time when I was there. And he was the one who introduced Catherine Ann Porter to Eudora Welty's editor, actually, Albert Erskine, who was working at that time as the business manager of the Southern Review. And he was a student of Warren's, Albert Erskine was, and found out about his wife, whom he married after Warren did put them together, Catherine Ann Porter. And when I was working for Albert as his assistant at Random House, he told me one day that he found out his wife's age by reading about it in Newsweek. Discovered that she was 48 years old and he was 28 at the time. But she was quite a beautiful woman. But that's getting off the track a bit. The piece that he read for us, the short story that made its way right into my heart, sitting there listening to him, was a piece of news. And that's in the same collection, I believe, her first collection of stories. And I just was in awe of hearing him talk about the piece. Because, I don't know, Brandon and John, that she came under fire later for later collections of stories when Diana Trilling came after her for sort of not being as funny and objectively talking about the world with the objective world out there. So Warren had written a seminal essay defending her modus operandi and the later stories there. So he was giving us some of his impressions of what it was like to read her when he was at the Southern Review. I also got the opportunity to actually meet her when I went to work. I was hired by Warren's editor at Random House, the man I just mentioned, Albert Erskine, who was moved from the Southern Review and many years later moved up north to New York and got his job there. And he had published Losing Battles, which was a controversial book in publishing because some people turned it down at first, I believe, before Albert was so eager to have it. And he was very delighted to have that book. And then she had just turned in, when I arrived there, a new book called The Optimist Daughter, which went on to win the Pulitzer Prize and gain her a lot of more standing with her reputation. But it was fun for me to work on that because I actually was asked to write the flap copy for the book. That's the little business that goes on either side of a hardcover edition of the book. But with Albert's editing, only half of my words ended up on there. But I'm still proud of that. She did come up to Random House. She had taken the train up. I don't think she liked flying too much, but she took the train from that goes through Atlanta all the way up to New York City. And I was able to meet her and visit with her on the 12th floor of Random House for a short while. And she was just as charming as you would imagine and as gentle and in a way truly humble in some wonderful, magical way, both feet on the ground. Speaking of Flannery O'Connor, as you did, I happened to come across a quote that she wrote, and it shows her own deep appreciation of O'Connor. And she says in this quote, this is Flannery O'Connor speaking, "An idiom characterizes a society. And when you ignore the idiom, you are very likely ignoring the whole social fabric that could make a meaningful character. You can't say anything meaningful about the mystery of a personality unless you put that personality in a believable and significant social context. A great deal of the Southern writer's work is done for him before he begins, because our history lives in our talk." In one of Eudora Welty's stories, a character says, "Where I come from, we use fox for yard dogs and owls for chickens, but we sing true." Now, O'Connor says, there is a whole book in that one sentence. And it's something I encounter when I'm teaching creative writing in a class, that a lot of times there's a resistance to locating one of their stories in a particular place. Students sometimes, not all of them, but sometimes there is this idea that you are more universal if you do not pin yourself down to one place. So you could be writing a story, as Raymond Carver does, I think that's part of the influence, without actually naming anything, since America has, in a way, become more homogenized. But I was very glad to see that O'Connor is calling us back, and as Eudora Welty also thought so much of place. And it reminded me as well of an anecdote told by, of all people, Sergei Rachmaninoff. But it really fits exactly what I think about Welty and where the power of her humor comes from. And what Rachmaninoff relayed was this. A story of a tailor who sets up a shop in Paris, and he puts a sign out saying, "Best tailor in Paris." Well, then another tailor moves into the neighborhood and steps up at his shop right across the street, and his sign says, "Best tailor in France." Wouldn't you know it, but a third tailor sets up shop right down the street, and his sign says, "Best tailor in the world." Well, a fourth tailor moves in right next to this same shop, and his sign says, "The best tailor on this street." And that tailor is Welty, I think.
One of the things that came through in both of your presentations that is, I think, really distinct to Welty and something that she does really well, and that people who try to sort of do Welty often don't do as well, is how she really works the line between comedy and horror in a really interesting sort of way. I mean, Why I Live at the P.O. is an incredibly funny story, but it's also sort of heartbreaking, right? I mean, the story that is underneath the story we're being told about this family falling apart. And a piece of news, the story that Jim mentioned, which maybe is less familiar to some of you, is about a woman named Ruby Walker. Let's say that's her name. You don't know. And she finds a newspaper saying that from another state saying that Ruby Walker was shot in the leg by her husband, and she is thrilled because that is more interesting than her life. One of the things I think Welty does with her first-person narrators, especially such as the sister in Why I Live at the P.O., is to sort of capture that moment where the engaging person telling you the funny story becomes the creepy person leaning over on you, on the bus or the airplane, and you realize you're stuck with them for 6 hours. Her novel, The Ponder Heart, is one that does that really well. The whole novel is a dramatic monologue by the niece of a wealthy Southern plutocrat who is a bit addled, who is on trial for murdering his wife. His third wife, if you count his Tom Thumb wedding. He's always really insistent that the Tom Thumb wedding he had count. At his trial, at the final moment of his trial, he begins to get out of what's going on simply by giving away all of his money and throwing it out to everyone. And so I was just gonna read a passage from this. Everybody in town, Eubankses, McGee's, Sistrunk's, old Miss Weta Sampson that hadn't been out of her house in years but wanted to be carried to this and couldn't hear a word that was said, but put out her little skin and bones hand now for what came her way. And all the children in town, they were loose, and total strangers who always go to anything, and the coroner, that blind bodkin, everybody that could walk and two that couldn't, got some. Some put their hands out like they were almost scared not to. The peacocks hung back the longest with their mouths open, but the little ones in diapers soon began to strike out and run after floating bills that got loosed and were flying around. Old Mr. Jeff Eubanks, he says, "Stop him, Miss Edna Earl, stop him, young lady." Next, Mr. Banks' sister stands up and roars out, "Where did you get that money?" "Well," says Miss Missionary Sistrunk, the oldest one, returned from wildest Africa just 24 hours before. "The Ponders, as I've always been told, did not burn their cotton when Sherman came, and maybe this is their judgment." "Take that back, Miss Florette," I says over people's heads. "The Ponders did not make their money that way. You got yours suing. What if that train hadn't hit Professor McGee? Where'd there any Sistrunks be today? We sold pine trees and way after Sherman, and you know it." And she responds, "'Twas the same Yankees you sold it to." And this goes on for a while. And finally, Edna Earl, the narrator, says, "The worst thing you can give away is money. I learned that if Uncle Daniel didn't. You and them are both done for then somehow. You can't go on after it and still be you and them. Don't ever give me $1 million. It'll come between us." And this is a very kind of funny experiment in voice and caricature. But beneath that, this guy has gotten off for killing his wife by throwing a bunch of money around the courtroom. And so there's something interesting, I think, in the way that Welty makes us complicit in laughing at these eccentricities that are excusing these sort of deep kind of social problems and wrongs.
Louisiana Book Talks is produced in cooperation with the Center for the Book in the State Library of Louisiana and made possible in part by a grant from the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. This is a program of Louisiana Public Broadcasting.